Welcome to the Friday edition of Juan's World, and I was casting around a little bit for my topic today, almost in the same way that I did my spirit talk last Friday, and was very much inclined to do something similar again today. But I hit on a topic which I think will be a little bit appealing, having to do with education. And the way I came to it was via what I've been working on this week. I've been trying to finalize the edit of my manuscript on Fieldwork, which is due back at the publisher on Saturday. And the person I've been working with has been very busy because she's tied up with the end of semester stuff in Illinois, and I've been champing at the bit, doing what I can, and then all of a sudden on Wednesday a flurry of stuff came through, and then again today, it's actually Thursday today, and so I was up very early this morning, 2 or 3 o'clock, and I just pounded it out, and by 8 or 9 o'clock this morning I'd got everything finished, including the last bit, which involved transferring our joint manuscript, which is on Google Docs, into MS Word. And any of you who know anything about these things know that when you try to transfer from one piece of software to another, formatting issues and other things get you all tied up. And so I spent another couple of hours getting the formatting right, getting the table of contents right, and so forth. And now I'm done. And I'm going to let it percolate for the rest of the day, and then either this evening or early Saturday morning I'm going to send it off. And then there's going to be a big void. I've still got 2 other books that are in contract, but the publishers aren't communicating with me and I have nothing to do. So my prime energy is dissipating. So what I wanted to talk about was how I hit on becoming a professional intellectual. I know how that happened. It doesn't just happen because you want it. It happens, I think, by a lot of really difficult to understand circumstances. So let's go down that path. Now, as a teacher, I'm always interested in what motivates students, and some of that's vocational, some of it's narcissistic, but you can't really be a teacher of any quality unless you care about your students and their progress. And it's always intrigued me that some students are just motivated right out of the gate, and some never are, and some a very large chunk are in the middle, kind of a bell curve really. And the issue is not how to motivate the ones who are already motivated, of course, and it's not really motivating those who have zero motivation, although I mean that's an interesting prospect, but a tough one. But the real challenge for the most part is motivating those who are sitting on the fence, who could go one way or another. And of course I realize that there are many, many different teaching strategies, and some of them don't involve school at all. Some people educate themselves. They prosper very well without school, or they have teachers that are not professionals in some capacity. And but that's another whole topic. You know, there's Rudolf Steiner's methods, there's Maria Montessori's methods, there's all different kinds of methods. And watching my son go to school and then teaching him myself, I am very well aware of how different overarching methodologies have very different effects. He started off in a Montessori school and did pretty well. He was difficult. He's a difficult child. He did not prosper at a standard state school in the United States. He did very well with homeschooling, and a great bulk of that involved him teaching himself. And he's still that way. He took time to adjust to university because he wasn't used to sitting in a classroom and taking notes and that kind of thing, but he did adjust. And all of which leads me to my own journey through school, and like how it was that somewhere along the line I decided that it was a good idea to work hard. Not just a good idea, but an enjoyable thing to work hard in school. And so I'm going to take you through what are often thought of as 12 grades or 12 levels, from 1 to 12, from the first year in school to the last. And I went to 4 different schools in 2 countries. I started off my schooling in England, and I did year 1 and year 2 in England. And I don't really know whether I was any good or not. I think I was okay. I think I learned how to read. I learned how to add and subtract and multiply in simple ways. And those first 2 years in school in England were mostly just fun. You know, we sat at group tables and we did a lot of projects in groups. We did some cooking, we did painting, finger painting. I think we probably did most of our 3-hour stuff in the mornings, and in the afternoons mostly just learning through play kind of stuff. I don't remember it very well. I don't remember much about my teachers, a little bit. I remember, for example, that we learned to read by what's called the look and say method. The teacher often had flashcards and would hold them up and we had to say the word, and so I learned to spell by looking at words. I can now do it a little bit better, but there was a time when I couldn't tell you the spelling of a word, but I could write it down and I could know whether it was correct or not. That's still true. When I see a word that is misspelled, I immediately recognize it as misspelled. But if you asked me, for example, to spell necessary, I have to see the word, and then when I see it, I can spell it Necessary. Okay, so that was that. Then I went to the 3rd year in South Australia. My family migrated to South Australia when I was 6. Started year 3 when I was 7, or turning 7. And South Australian schools were absolutely Victorian in their ethos. There you sat in rows in desks and you were quiet and you didn't speak ever, and particularly if you had a male teacher, you were likely to get beaten with a cane if you did something wrong immediately. And we had to write with pens that were dip pens, like not much different from quills, except they were wooden pens that you put a nib into, and you got a new nib each week, and you had a ceramic ink well which was filled up each day by the ink monitor, and you dipped your pen in the ink and you wrote in copperplate. You learned copperplate writing in year 3, and then from then on you had to write in copperplate, which I was hopeless at. And I was in that primary school from year 3 to year 7. And I would say that most of the time when I was there, I was a completely average student. Although towards the end, towards year 7, I floated higher up the class lists. But I was never top of the class. And many years I was very much in the middle. And the education was really dominated by the 3 hours. Until lunchtime, we had a fixed agenda, a timetable every morning. We started with reading and composition, that's writing, and dictation, spelling, followed by mental arithmetic. Mental arithmetic was very, very important. And then written arithmetic. And in the afternoons, which were a lot shorter, the morning took most of our time, and then we had I think about an hour or a bit more for lunch. Then the afternoon was shorter, and we usually did something slightly more creative. Maybe one day a week we'd do some geography, some history, all English history. Never did any Australian history. Never learned anything about Australian history in school. Some drawing, and penmanship, what we called writing, but it was really like learning to do your cursive copperplate better and better, and so forth. And then when I got to high school, which would be year 8, we started to have, it was 40 lessons a week, and it was divided very heavily among mathematics and the sciences. We had 10 mathematics lessons a week. That's 25% of the curriculum. 10 mathematics and 10 science, which in the first year was general science, which included physics, chemistry, and biology. And then in the second year onwards, it was just chemistry and biology. So half the curriculum, half our time was spent with mathematics and physics and chemistry. And the rest was divided up into English, which I think we had 5 subjects, maybe 5 periods, geography, Latin, I think that was it. And odds and ends. I mean, we had an afternoon when we had sport, and so on. So you could. And in the first year we had woodwork and drawing, but that by the second year, the people who were in the top stream, the ones who were going to university, were all devoted to the academic subjects that they were going to pursue in university, which was expected to be what's now called the STEM subjects, the science, technology, and mathematics. And I was okay. I mean, I liked chemistry a lot. My father was a chemistry teacher, and I had a chemistry lab of my own at home, and I enjoyed playing around with that. The trouble is that I had studied chemistry since I had been in primary school, and so I wasn't learning anything particularly new in high school. I wasn't exactly bored, but I wasn't particularly interested. But I only stayed at that school for 2 and a bit years. That's 8th to 9th year, because in the beginning of the next year, my family moved to England, where I started again in the 9th year, and then did 9, 10, 11, and 12 in England. And the first school I went to, I was put in a kind of middle stream, what was called the B stream, like the A stream were the top students, and I'd always been in the A stream in Australia, but I was put in the B stream for no good reason. It was all right, and I was top of the class for a term, but it wasn't very challenging, and I complained to my parents about it, and they transferred me to a different school. And it was a grammar school. Now, in England in the 1960s, there was what's called the 11+ exam, which is basically an IQ test. There were some other tests as well, but it was basically an IQ test. And above a certain level, you were placed in a grammar school, and below a certain level, you were placed in a secondary modern school. And the idea was that the students of the grammar schools were going to get an academic education, and the students at the secondary modern schools were going to get a trade education. That in those days you could leave school at 14, and most of them, specifically at the trade schools, would be expected to leave at 14 and become apprentices, painter, cook, bricklayer, whatever. But their education was only enough to get them into the 3 hours well enough that they could then become apprenticed and so on. That was the idea anyway. I mean, it didn't all, none of it really made a whole lot of sense. But anyway, the grammar schools were the schools where you were going to go on to do public exams. At 16, you were supposed to do the O level, or the ordinary level, and you should take about 8 subjects for O level, and most students left after they took O level, so that at the secondary modern schools, most of the students were going to leave at about 14 years old, and at the grammar schools, most of the students were going to leave at 16, and a very small number were going to go on to take A level, and of that number, a very small percentage were going to go to university. About 3% of students back when I was a student went to university. And very few people actually really understood the benefits of tertiary education, to the point where I can remember having discussions with people when I had been admitted to Oxford, who were curious about what it is that people did at university, because the 97% of people who went to school in England at that time went on to become businessmen or merchants or cooks or painters or what. I mean, they went into professions or trades and didn't understand what a university was all about. So the point that I'm going to get to eventually, there is a point in here, I promise, was that I had my sights set on university from the time that I entered high school in South Australia, because my father had been to university and I understood what it was about. And my mother went to university when we lived in Australia and became a teacher, and my elder sister went to university. So it just seemed like a natural progression. And that was my ambition, even though I had no idea why. Although when I was very young, I had the idea that I wanted to be a doctor. And the reason I wanted to be a doctor was because when I lived in Australia and I was a little boy and got what were then called the childhood diseases, measles, mumps, rubella, chicken pox, and so forth, the doctor used to come to our house. And I always remember, like, immediately the doctor entered my bedroom feeling better. And, he'd check me out and speak to my mother and all of this and give her some medicine, and I got better. And I thought, what a great profession, making people better. But then as I got older, I decided that medicine wasn't really attractive for various reasons, which I will explain. I mean, I was very interested in science. All through my grammar school days, I did very well at physics and chemistry. Not so well at mathematics. I don't have quite the depth of feeling about mathematics. There's something about a mathematical mindset that I can't quite grasp. I mean, I'm pretty good at advanced mathematics. I can do calculus and set theory and so forth quite well, but I just don't get into the deep parts. Whereas I did start doing that with chemistry and physics when I was at the second grammar school I went to. And here's the point I'm trying to get at. In the first grammar school I was at in England, I didn't really feel as if the students that I was with were, I don't know quite how to describe it, they weren't very intellectual. They did their work because they had to, and some of them did it very well, but they didn't penetrate anything very deeply. They did what they were told, and they considered that to be good enough. And for the most part, that's the way I had been. I mean, like in my primary school, I did what I was told, so I wouldn't get beaten with a cane. And that idea just sort of continued on into my high school in Australia, and into the first grammar school I went to in England. And then when I went to the second grammar school, I was put in a stream that was an accelerated stream, where we normally would do the O-levels at year 10. That stream did their O-levels at year 9. They moved faster. And I had to do a lot more subjects. I had to do French, which I'd started with my sister in Australia, because my parents knew we were going to England and knew I'd have to do French. So I started off, I was well behind, but I studied French, Latin, English, history, geography, biology, chemistry, physics, technical drawing, mathematics, Math 1 and they called it 1 and 2, although they weren't very particularly different. And all of those were taken at one go. And then if you got at least 8 at a decent level, 8 O levels, then you could go on and do A level. And I did, and I did quite well. And this is how things changed for me. And it's the core of my spirit talk. It had to do with my peer group. In all the schools up until that point, my peer group had not been particularly interested in academics. And for some dumb reason, the class I was put in at that grammar school had a high percentage of students who were fascinated by intellectual stuff. I had a couple of friends, for example, who were just amazed by history. And by history, I don't mean, you know, dates and people and events and so forth. I mean the real key question: why did this happen, and why did it happen, when it happened, and where it happened? And in fact, my year 10, my O-level teacher, I remember him very clearly asking the question that practically turned my world around when he asked us, because we'd studied the Industrial Revolution the year before, and he said, "Why did the revolution happen?" And we'd been given like a list of reasons, like one of them was, you know, that there had been a wave of inventors, which is really stupid, and that there were large deposits of coal and iron in England and so forth. And we said, okay, you know, wave of inventors, and he said, well, aren't there always intelligent people? Why did it happen in the 19th century? You know, well, coal and iron, hasn't it always been there? And there's something just clicked in me, like, oh yeah, this is a serious question. It's actually one that I don't really have a good answer to yet. Although I've studied, you know, studied Marx and whatnot, and you know, I know what people have said now, but it was a combination of being asked the right questions by a certain number of teachers who were you know, really inspiring. But more than anything else, it was my peer group, because, you know, like when the teachers asked questions like that, my friends and I would talk about it. We got fascinated by it. We'd go off to bookstores or to the library and get more books. Like we had a textbook which we could use and, you know, jot down all the stuff from it. But I remember later on, when I got to A-level and was studying A-level history, I discovered that well, things like the Napoleonic Wars were complicated. The French Revolution was complicated. Why did it start? And different historians had different answers. And it was, to me, it was like more engaging than the sciences, because at that level in chemistry and physics there wasn't any great room for creativity in terms of the experiments we had to do and the theories we had to learn and apply. In history it was much more open. It's like, wow, I can have an opinion, and it can differ from the opinion of my textbook legitimately, as long as I have evidence, as long as I can back it up. And I just got the bit between my teeth and ran with it. I just loved it. I started, you know, buying all kinds of history books and devouring them, and talking to my friends and writing extra essays and talking to my teachers and just being inspired. And I ended up getting into Oxford by virtue of my essays. and so on. I mean, that's how it all began. It began because of my peer group. If I'd stayed at the other grammar school, I probably never would have, well, certainly not got to Oxford. None of my friends at the first grammar school got into Oxford and Cambridge. At my second grammar school, a quarter, 25% of the boys in my year got into Oxford and Cambridge. Very hard. But that was my peer group. The ones, if I had been just a little bit older and had been in the year above, I wouldn't have had that peer group, or the year below. It was that, and just dumb luck that I landed in a peer group that just inspired me. Now, why did it inspire me? Why didn't I just continue on the way I had been in Australia, just like middle of the road? Well, there, I don't know. That's a character issue. I mean, I think maybe I was just competitive, you know, just like but I don't know. That's the part that I can't really fully put my finger on. But I certainly can. I mean, I can understand that there are certain peer groups that work and certain ones that don't. And I've known this from decades of teaching, that some classes are just hard work because the people, the students in it, are just very hard to motivate. And other classes where they have like a central peer group that is highly motivated, and it sort of elevates everybody else. Like everybody else wants to rise to their level. And so I just was lucky in my year in being in a group like that. I don't know whether there is a theory of education lurking in here somewhere, but it is an important issue. So, you know, that it's not just having good teachers. Having good teachers is important. You do need inspiring teachers. And if you're a teacher, I think it's worthy to aspire to be an engaging and motivating teacher. But that's only half the equation. The other half is the peer group. And the group that you're going to interact with all the time, because you're only going to see your teacher both in secondary school and in university at most a few hours a week, but you're going to be with your peer group all the time. And if your peer group is spending all of its time talking about football and playing football and messing around and sneaking off to have a cigarette, you know, that's what you're going to do. But if they're all huddled in the corner saying, why did Mazzini unify Italy? What was that all about? And you get engaged in it, then it elevates everything. So I just have to thank my lucky stars that I lucked into a great peer group in my late teenage years and set me on a path that I continued on for the rest of my life. All right, well, it's not a spirit talk. It's a I did have a topic in mind, although I had to meander to get there. And meanwhile, please tell your friends, please like and subscribe. And I will see you on Tuesday. And I'm hoping, well, I'm not sure yet, but my idea is to make New Orleans pralines. So have a good weekend.